There are 3 steps to go from bot to pro movement in Warzone, and today I'm sharing them with you because I know there are a lot of people out there going through the pain of getting slammed over and over again by good players, and they aren't sure what to do to get better. And I know that because that person getting slammed was me just a few years ago. But after many months of frustration, I figured out how to improve my movement, and now I consistently drop high kill games. So stick around until the end of this video because I'm going to explain exactly what you need to do to become a movement king. So the first step was something that I didn't learn for a long time. You see, I watched movement tutorials and I learned the basics on YouTube, but what I found out was it didn't really help me win many gunfights. In fact, I started losing a lot more at first because I was trying to use flashy movement. And it wasn't until after losing a lot of these gunfights, I realized that I needed to start training like an athlete to start getting better. You see, athletes spend a lot of time doing drills and they practice the skills that they're going to use in a game. And Call of Duty is no different. Movement is not just about learning the buttons you need to press. You have to practice like you're going to play in a game. So for the first step, I'm going to take you through all the movements you need to learn and give you 7 practice drills. And then I'm going to show you how to put all of them together to break your opponent's ankles. Now the first mechanic to learn is the slide cancel. Now to do it, we go into a tactical sprint, we press our crouch button to start a slide, and then we press jump to cancel it. It's just 2 buttons. And you can change the length of your slide by adjusting how long you wait to cancel it with the second button. And there's several reasons why we slide cancel. The first is we get peeker's advantage, because when we slide around a corner, it takes time for that data to go to the servers and reach the other player, which gives us a really small advantage where we can see that player before he can see us, and it gives us the ability to get the first shot in a gunfight. And we can also use it to break cameras, which is basically just a term for faking out your opponent and causing them to lose track of where you are, which can oftentimes get you easy kills. And finally, it makes you a little bit harder to hit because you can change your momentum very quickly, and the sliding character model is a little bit smaller than one standing up. So to practice like how we would in a game, the first thing we're going to work on is slide challenging a corner for peeker's advantage. You first want to find a target, and you want to start behind a wall and then slide cancel out past the wall and shoot at the target. Now I like using the multiplayer map called Training Facility because there are a lot of targets to choose from, but you can easily do this wherever you want, including in Plunder. Just pick a place on the edge of the map without many players. Also, I should mention that if you are playing in multiplayer, make sure that you have the tac pads equipped because you have them by default in Warzone and they change your slide behavior. Okay, so getting back to the drill. While you're working on this, there's a couple things you want to keep in mind. First off, you want to make sure that your crosshair is accurate as you go around the corner and is as close as you can get it to the target before you ADS. You want to have to make as little adjustment as possible when you go to shoot your gun. This is called your centering. And the second thing to be aware of is how far you slide past the wall. You want to practice sliding out far, and you also want to practice stopping close to the wall, because depending on the situation you're in, it might be useful to do either one. The important thing is you want to be in complete control of where you stop after the wall. Now before I move on to the next drill, it's important to talk a little bit about how we actually learn new skills. And we simply learn these skills through repetition and through feedback. And what a lot of people don't realize is you can actually develop bad skills if your practice sucks. Because how you practice is exactly how you're going to play in a game. If you rush through this drill and don't practice it correctly, you're repeating and reinforcing bad habits that are going to follow you into a game, and you're probably going to die a lot in gunfights. So you want to make sure that you're taking time on these drills. And it can be extremely helpful to record yourself and watch it back to analyze things that you're doing wrong. I remember when I first started practicing like this, it was really hard. Because when you're shooting at a target, you don't get aim assists. And there were a lot of times when I wanted to just give up and play the game. But that's why whenever a drill is hard for me, I try to remember the 3 S's. Now the first S stands for simplify. Let's say I was working on this drill and my shot was all over the place. Well, the first thing that I would do is I would stop shooting and I would just work on my centering. And now there's less buttons that I have to press and less steps that I have to focus on, so I can really work on the first things that I need to do correctly. You always want to simplify something when you're having trouble with it. Like for instance, if you were teaching someone math, you wouldn't start with calculus. You would start with the basics. And as dumb as it sounds, learning to slide cancel isn't any different. And while I'm simplifying things, I would also be slowing them down. And this is the second S. And it's something that I learned from playing guitar, which is that when you're learning a new song, you start slow and you do it right until you aren't making any mistakes, and then you speed it up. You have to remember that our brains are hardwired to create habits. If you practice something over and over again the wrong way, that's the habit that you're building, and you're gonna do that in a real game. So realistically, if you've never practiced slide canceling like this before, it may take several hours of practice to start to get it. Just set aside 15 minutes a day and practice it until you're hitting the target most of the time. And that's the final S, shoot accurately. I know that I've mastered a drill or an exercise and that I can move on to practicing something else when I'm consistently hitting my shots. So obviously that's a bit subjective and based on your own skills, so you'll just have to be the judge of when you're hitting your shots consistently enough to move on to something else. And I also want to mention that for every drill in this video where you're standing up, you eventually want to get to the point where at the end of your movement, you're strafing left or right. You always want to be strafing in a gunfight, so you want to practice that way, because you never want to make it easy on your opponents. Now the next drill for slide canceling will help you start breaking cameras. If you look at this clip here, I'm getting shot and I know that I'm getting chased out of a window. So to break this guy's camera, I simply fake like I'm going one way out of the window to break his line of sight, and then I immediately slide back the other way to shoot him in the back. So the important skill here is you need to be able to do 180-degree turns with your slide cancel. So for this drill, you're going to start with your back to the target and you want to slide cancel away from it and turn and shoot at it. And remember, the 3 S's apply to this drill too. If you're having trouble, do like what I did before on the last exercise. And the important thing to work on for this drill is you want to get to the point where you're not significantly overshooting or undershooting your target as you spin around to shoot at it. You also want to try to get your spin to be as fast as possible without losing any accuracy. And once you have these drills down, you should start shooting at moving targets. If you have multiplayer, that's great, because you can set up bots, and instead of just mindlessly running around and shooting at them, you can just practice your slide cancels. You can challenge the bots at each corner and try to break their cameras when they're coming around a corner. I have all my custom game settings that I use for practice in multiplayer in the description below. But for those of you who don't have multiplayer, Plunder works really well too. Just hot drop into an area of the map where there are a lot of teams and try to push them while using the slide cancel as much as possible. Remember, repetition is what builds skill. And that's why I strongly believe that if you focus on learning one movement at a time and become insanely good at doing just that one thing, you're going to be way better than the person who tries to learn everything at once and is just okay at each skill. So don't be afraid to take a few weeks practicing your slide cancels for 15 to 30 minutes a day before you move on to some of these other movements. Okay, so now that I've broken down my system for learning these movements and drills, I'm going to go through the rest of these skills a little bit quicker. So the next movement you need to know is the jump shot. To do it, you simply jump while you're in a gunfight. And it can be really effective to help you get more kills because you raise your character's hitbox, so your opponent will hopefully be shooting your legs while you're getting higher damage chest or headshots. I think this movement works great inside buildings where you don't have a lot of room to move around, but it also works great for challenging corners, because if someone is, for instance, on the other side of a wall, you can jump past their aim and be harder to hit because they're gonna have to move their crosshair pretty far to get on target. So for drill number 1, I just want you to practice jumping in place and shooting at a target to get used to the feeling of the movement. One thing to keep in mind is that depending on where you aim when you're starting your jump, you may have to slightly lower your crosshair to stay on target. I typically like to aim at people's chests because when I use the jump shot, I end up getting headshots to deal more damage. And drill number 2 is just jump challenging a corner and shooting at a target. This drill should help you get used to how fast your character is moving when you're jumping, so you know how much to move your aim when you're challenging a corner. And like I mentioned earlier, once you get comfortable with each drill, make sure to practice strafing while you're shooting at the targets as well. You also want to mirror every drill if possible. You don't want to be dominant moving to the left or the right, so make sure you take time to practice all these drills on both sides if it makes sense. And just like before, once you're pretty good with the static targets, you should go shoot some bots or hop into plunder to practice the jump shot against something that's moving. Now, while you're working on your jump shots, another small skill you can add on to make yourself a bit harder to track is a bunny hop. All you need to do is press jump again immediately once you've hit the ground, and you can just use the same directional jump exercise from before. Unfortunately, bunny hopping isn't that great in this game because you don't go very far on the second jump. But anything you can do to add a little bit more movement into your game is typically a good thing if you can still hit your shots. Okay, so moving on, the next 2 movements are really helpful when you find yourself behind a half wall or an object that you can shoot over. Now the first movement is the crouch spam. You basically duck and then stand up repeatedly behind cover, which makes it harder for someone to shoot you. This can be extremely useful in a game when you want to hard scope a target, but you don't want to just be standing still. Now, contrary to the name, you don't actually want to spam your crouch button. What you want to do is you want to press crouch and then jump to stand back up. This is way faster than just pressing your crouch button repeatedly. Now for this drill, I like to pick 1 or 2 targets, and basically I'm just going to crouch spam and try to shoot each target. It's a simple drill, but what you'll need to work on is the rhythm of pressing the buttons to go up and down as fast as possible. If you do it wrong, you're going to jump on accident, which is exactly what you don't want. And the next movement to learn is snaking. Now this is very similar to the crouch spam and it works well in the same situations, but it's basically an exploit in the game, so you're actually even a little bit harder to hit. Now to do it, you want to go into a prone position and you immediately sprint out of it repeatedly. I like to roll my left analog stick in somewhat of a half circle to stop myself from moving forward. Now the button timings for this are a little bit tricky, so don't get discouraged if you don't get it right away. Now snaking did get a slight nerf in one of the recent updates, but it's still really useful in a lot of situations. I like to use it a lot when I'm playing for information. Like for instance, if I get shot in the back and I'm not sure if a team is pushing me or I'm not sure where I got shot from, I like to snake before I start to heal up, just so I know what's going on around me. And you can see that I do that in this clip here, and I eventually locate the person who shot at me and then I go to challenge him. But if we get back to the drill, just like with the crouch spam, give yourself a target or 2 to shoot at while practicing. And once again, once you're good with these static targets, just go shoot some bots or real players and try to use these movements as much as possible in the game. Okay, and now on to a Call of Duty classic, the drop shot. To do it, you simply hold down your crouch button to go prone in a gunfight. This movement is great when you're in a close range fight because when you go prone, you completely disappear from your opponent's screen. This works the best up close because your opponent has to look down really far to see you, compared to if you do it at a longer range where they don't have to move their gun nearly as far to get some shots on you. And to practice this, it's really easy. I like to just shoot at a target while I go prone. And what's important here is that I move my aim up as I'm laying down, because what I don't want is to go prone and then start hitting lower damage leg shots on my opponent. I still want to hit those chest or head shots. Now while drop shotting is great to surprise someone in a gunfight, it does have some disadvantages. First off, your opponent is more likely to land headshots on you because your head is now the closest thing to their gun. And secondly, when you go prone, you can't strafe, or look around very easily. So whenever an opponent does this to me, one of the first things I try to do is jump and strafe around, because you become extremely hard to track for the player that's laying down. So while working on this exercise and shooting the target, make sure to also practice quickly getting out of the prone position by pressing your sprint button and holding forward on your left analog stick. And with this game engine, you can actually do it surprisingly fast. Now, something that used to be a little bit busted in this game was the instant drop shot. If you were tack sprinting forward, you could immediately pull back on your left thumbstick while going prone, and your character would lay down almost instantly. Now, I'm pretty sure this got heavily nerfed for controller players, and it doesn't really work all the time, but if you're on keyboard, I think it works a lot more consistently, because keyboard players have a separate button for going prone, and it's not tied to their crouch button. I still tend to pull back on my left analog stick when going prone, mostly out of habit, even though I don't think it works that often, so that's just something for you to be aware of. And just like all the other skills from before, make sure to shoot a lot of bots and practice drop shotting in a game to find out when this works best for you. Now, the last basic movement skill is diving, but I'm actually going to hold off on talking about it until the end of this video, because there are some settings and things you need to adjust to be able to do it, so it makes a little bit more sense to talk about it there. Okay, so we've made it through all the basic exercises, and now assuming you've learned all these movements and practiced these drills to become really good at all of them, the next step to becoming a good movement player is to reach what I call mechanical flow state. Now, flow state is kind of a buzzword, but what it basically means is to be fully immersed in what you're doing and focus on a single task or activity. So what I mean by reaching mechanical flow state is you have to get to the point where you no longer have to think about your movement at all. You're able to do all these movements together in different combinations, one after the other, depending on what's needed in the gunfight, and it's all just muscle memory, because all you're thinking about is the enemy that you're trying to shoot and kill. And the best way that I've found to get to this flow state point is to practice chaining all these movements together in different combinations while shooting at targets. So what I do is I just make up these little movement courses where I try to practice all the movements together in a way that makes sense with the cover around me, like how I would actually use it in a gunfight. Now, there's an endless amount of ways to do this, but here are 3 movement combos that I think are really helpful. Now, the first is this one, where I simply slide cancel back and forth while shooting at a target. Now, we used to be able to chain slide cancels together infinitely in Warzone 1, but unfortunately we can't really do that anymore before our tack sprint runs out. So what I like to do is just keep slide canceling until that happens. And I think this drill is really helpful because it gets you in sync with the button timings that you need to chain slide cancels together as fast as possible. Because like I mentioned earlier, slide canceling is great because you can change your momentum and change your direction very quickly, and it makes you a really tough target to track and hit in gunfights. And once you get good at that, the next movement chain is to pick 2 targets where you have to slide cancel around a corner each time to shoot at them. And I think this drill is great because in real matches, there are a lot of times when you need to clear out buildings quickly and check a lot of different rooms for enemies. So being able to accurately center your crosshair as you're going around corners is a great skill to have. And finally, we have this slide cancel jump combo. And what I like about this is that by jumping out of the slide cancel, you can go pretty far in the opposite direction that you were sliding from. So this can be really useful in a gunfight because you're going to be very difficult for your opponent to track. Now, aside from that, it's really up to you to create your own movement courses. I would just encourage you to try to pair up all the different movements together so you can get all of them into your muscle memory. At this point, it kind of becomes like a game. You just want to keep adding more and more movement combinations to your arsenal and get as comfortable as you can using them in different scenarios. The overall goal for these exercises is to have your movement become instinctual and also have it not negatively impact your aim. If you have multiplayer, I highly recommend shooting a lot of bots with these different movement combinations, and you can even practice kind of just dancing around them with movement to see what might work in an actual game. Now before we get to the final step to become a movement king, there are some additional skills you need to know. First off, we have shouldering or peeking. Basically, this is just quickly popping in and out behind cover for information on what your enemies are doing. I like to roll my analog stick in a circle to peek as fast as possible. And I find that I use this skill the most when I'm plating up. So what you can do to practice is just hop into plunder with some Semtex and the resupply perk. And then all you have to do is just blow yourself up so that you don't have any plates, and then just practice pressing your plating button while peeking for information. Now you always want to be unpredictable, so make sure you work on peeking in every direction. And remember, there are a lot of pieces of cover where you can jump and still get information. Now the next thing to talk about is using doors. Doors are great in gunfights because they can easily confuse your opponents. Whenever I'm being chased, I like to shut them behind me before I re-challenge because no one ever expects you to do that. Also, if I know someone's near me, I like to shut a door before I push them because once again, it's just something that people don't expect. And finally, if I'm low on health and I know I'm about to be pushed, I always try to heal up the corner of a door frame because as soon as they jump into the room, I'm able to run back out to give myself a little bit more time to heal or to try to reposition. So the important skills here are you need to be able to quickly shut doors as you're running through them. All you have to do is briefly look at the door and then press your interact button. But you also want to be able to burst through the door if it's not already open and then shut it at the same time, so make sure to practice that too. And next up, ziplines got a major change with the new Warzone update. They're a lot faster now, and the major thing you need to know about them is that you don't have to take them all the way up. If you spam your jump button right at the top and then hold backwards on your analog stick, you can actually fly off the zipline. This can be helpful to try to avoid dying to someone if they're camping at the top of a building, but just beware, it probably won't work against good players. Also, if you don't want to fly off the building, you can mantle onto the top by spamming your jump button and then holding forward. I would consider these movements something that are nice to know, but like I said, these things are only going to work against average players. Anyone decent is probably going to fry you out of the air if you try to do it. Okay, so moving on to cars. Now car plays are great because you can get really easy kills by doing some pretty basic moves. You definitely want to practice switching seats because almost everyone just blindly shoots at the driver's seat when they see a car. I don't think the visibility is very good, so most people can't really tell when someone moves. So when I'm driving a car and I see someone, I like to swap to the seat furthest away from the enemy and then lean out of the vehicle to shoot at them, because the car should give you a little bit of extra cover in the gunfight. Now something you can also do is that when you're leaned out of a window and then press the exit button, you'll actually dive out of the car, which can be enough to surprise someone to be able to hit your shots. Okay, and the last couple of things to cover before we get to the final step to become a good movement player is you can double tap your weapon swap to cancel the long animation when you pick up a weapon, and you can also use it to cancel a reload if you have to use your gun. And then I can't have a movement guide without mentioning stims. When you use one, it gives you a little bit of a speed boost as well as regenerating your health a little bit quicker, so it can be really overpowered in gunfights to break cameras because you really mess up people's timings when they're trying to track you. You just have to memorize how long it takes to pop one and try to position yourself in the gunfight to not take damage while you're doing it. And speaking of clips and breaking cameras, I do want to mention that there are a lot of movement players out there who play on super high sensitivities, and they do lots of 180 spins and they move their camera around a lot in gunfights. Now some of this is just to be flashy and make their clips look better, but depending on how it's used, you can actually make yourself a little bit harder to hit by doing this, because you can change directions more quickly on a higher sense. However, something to keep in mind is that this type of movement mostly works against lower skilled players, and you typically sacrifice a lot of aiming consistency by playing on a really high sense, so I personally don't do it. But if you're playing mostly for clips, it can look really cool, and there's nothing wrong with doing it, so you should definitely try it out if that interests you. But just know that it does take a lot of skill to be able to do this and still win your gunfights. And the final step to having good movement is demonstrated in these two clips here, and I want to see if you can catch what it is. In this first clip, I'm chasing an enemy down the stairs, and watch what I do to kill him. And then in the second clip, I'm the one being chased after I get bad timing at a window, and despite being almost dead, I'm able to turn the gunfight around and get the kill. Now, it might not seem like it, but in both of these clips, I did the exact same thing. I read my opponent's mind. I knew exactly what they were going to do, and I used my movement to get as far away from their crosshair as possible to buy myself time to hit my shots. This stairwell clip was actually pretty sloppy because I accidentally changed my guns, but the point is I knew he was baiting me to push him outside the building, and I just didn't fall for it. Every scenario in this game is going to be different, but if you can anticipate what people are going to do and then use your movement to surprise them, you're going to get a lot of kills. And the fastest way to get to the point where you can read people's minds is you have to aggressively push teams as a solo player. Putting yourself in high stress situations will force your brain to think faster under pressure, and even though you're going to die a lot, you'll eventually start to see patterns and be able to guess what your opponent is going to do. This is why a lot of casual players think Warzone pros are cheating, but the fact is most people on the map are pretty easy to read once you put enough hours into playing aggressively. So here are all the settings for my controller and for movement that I'm currently using. As you'll see, I don't have my dive button enabled because I'm using slide only. There's this weird thing with the game engine that you get a small delay if you have both slide and dive turned on. This is something I'm still experimenting with because diving is really useful, so I'll let you know what I end up using long term. But if you've made it this far in the video, I want to thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I also want to let you know that I do stream on Twitch, and the link is in the description to follow me. Now, something I haven't decided on that I'm considering doing is some one-on-one lessons for people wanting to improve a little bit faster. And if this is something you're interested in, make sure to leave a comment down below. If there's enough interest, I'll make a community post with more details about it. But thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.